You know, sometimes the people who seem the most put together are the ones hiding the darkest truths. We like to believe we can spot danger, that we'd recognize it if it were sitting across from us at dinner. But what happens when the danger wears a smile? When it shows up to church every Sunday? When it shares your last name? Today's story is one of betrayal that didn't start with violence. It started with silence. A slow unraveling. A quiet kind of cruelty that built over time until one day it turned deadly. It's about a man who saw it coming, but stayed anyway. It's about a woman who couldn't just walk away. And it's about the innocent people left behind to carry a legacy soaked in lies. This is the story of Rob and Brenda Andrew, and it's one that still echoes far beyond the day the garage went quiet. Chapter 1: The Last Visit. I still remember the moment I first stumbled upon this case. It wasn't just the headline that grabbed me, it was the silence behind it. A silence that hung in the air around every detail. A quiet town, a well-respected man, a woman with secrets, and two children caught in the crossfire of something much darker than anyone ever expected. Let me take you back to Oklahoma City the evening of November 20th, 2001. It was just days before Thanksgiving, a time that's usually full of warmth, laughter, family. But that night, something cold settled into the garage of a suburban home. Something final. Rob Andrew was on his way to pick up his kids for the holiday weekend. He and his wife Brenda were separated. Not divorced, something that already tells you this wasn't a clean break. Rob had moved into his own apartment, but he stayed involved. He wanted the best for his children. That never changed. He was driving over to the house they once shared. On the phone with a close friend, chatting casually, full of excitement. He was looking forward to spending Thanksgiving with his son and daughter, something so simple yet so meaningful for a father who was trying to keep some version of family intact. As he pulled into the garage, Brenda was already there, standing beside the family van, waiting. No kids in sight, just her. The garage door was open. He told his friend, "Hey, I just got here. I'll call you back." That would be the last call Rob ever made. Brenda told him the furnace pilot light had gone out, that the house was freezing. Could he take a look? Of course he could. Rob was the kind of man who said yes to things like that. Even if they were separated, even if it was awkward. He crouched down to inspect the heater, his back turned to the open garage door. And then it happened. Two masked figures appeared in the doorway. No warning, no demands, just gunfire. Rob was shot twice in the chest. Brenda was shot too, once in the arm. Within minutes, Brenda managed to call 911. She said she and her husband had just been ambushed in their own garage. Two masked men. No idea who they were or why they came. When police arrived, Rob was already gone. The garage told a strange story, no signs of robbery. Nothing stolen. Wallet still in his pocket. Vehicles untouched. No ransacking. No chaos. Just a body, and a story that didn't quite fit. People in the neighborhood couldn't believe it. Rob Andrew, the kind, church-going family man, shot dead in his own home. It didn't make sense. This was the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened, where people waved to each other from their driveways and left their doors unlocked at night. Now those same neighbors were whispering, wondering, was this really a random act of violence? Or was something else at play? That's where the real story begins. And trust me, it's not what you think. Chapter 2: A Perfect Man in a Perfect Town. When someone like Rob Andrew is killed, people don't just grieve. They question everything they thought they knew. Because Rob wasn't the kind of man you expect to have enemies. He wasn't involved in shady business. He wasn't reckless. He was by all accounts the man you'd want living next door. Quiet, reliable, kind. And that's exactly what made the whole thing so chilling. He lived in a quiet, upper-middle-class suburb, just outside Oklahoma City, a community where people took pride in clean yards, well-kept cars, and Sunday morning church attendance. Rob wasn't just part of that world, he was admired in it. He worked in advertising, and not just any job. He'd recently taken an executive position that came with status respect and a good salary. He was the kind of guy who didn't just succeed at work, he showed up early for men's group at church on Mondays, offering one-on-one support to other members. He listened. He cared. He was quite literally a pillar of his community. And yet now he was gone, shot in cold blood in a garage that once led into the home he shared with his wife and children. It didn't add up. And if Rob wasn't the type to attract violence, then who or what brought it to his doorstep? That's when the focus naturally turned to Brenda. Now I want to be fair. At first glance, Brenda didn't look like someone who would ever be caught in the middle of a crime story. She grew up in a religious household just like Rob. She was smart, quiet, and polite, the kind of girl who got straight A's, joined all the right clubs, and never broke curfew. She didn't party. She didn't drink. She helped others study. If anything, she was invisible, just another high achiever with a plan. In many ways, Brenda and Rob were the perfect match. They started dating in the early 1980s. She was still in high school. He was a freshman in college. Their connection felt natural, and from the outside, it looked like a storybook romance. They got married in 1984, and Rob, by all accounts, was completely smitten. Head over heels, he loved Brenda deeply. He built his life around her and their growing family. They had 2 kids, and he cherished them. Everything he did, every job, move, every early morning church session was somehow for them. For the family. But you know how it goes. The perfect couple image. It's rarely the whole picture. And in this case, it was a carefully polished surface, hiding something deeply fractured underneath. Because while Rob was building a career and trying to keep the household stable, something inside, Brenda, was shifting. And people around her, especially at church, started noticing. At first it was small. She changed her hair, started dressing a little differently, more confident, bolder. Some might say provocative, but it wasn't just about style. It was like Brenda was becoming someone else entirely, and not everyone saw it as a bad thing. People grow, people evolve, but this shift felt calculated, detached. Then the rumors started, quiet whispers at Sunday school, the kind of talk people pretend not to hear but absolutely pass along. Some said Brenda was spending a little too much time with another church member, a man named James Pavat. James wasn't a stranger. He was also a deacon like Rob. He worked in insurance, and he and Rob even knew each other, attended the same services, shook the same hands, sang the same hymns. But the closeness between James and Brenda, well, it started to raise eyebrows. They were seen talking, laughing, standing a little too close during coffee hour. And then when Brenda and Rob officially separated, James didn't fade into the background. He stepped in. Brenda and James were often seen together, not just at church, everywhere, restaurants, community events, even with the kids. And that's when something shifted for Rob. He wasn't naive. He kept a journal pages where he detailed his thoughts, his fears, and yes, his suspicions. He documented what he saw, what others told him, and most of all, the ache of watching his marriage slip away while still trying to hold it together for the kids, for appearances, for some faint hope that Brenda might come back to him. But what Rob didn't know, what none of us did, really, was just how far things had already gone, and how much Brenda was willing to risk to make sure she never had to go back. Because, behind the church, smiles, the PTA meetings, the carefully arranged dinner parties, something darker was already in motion. And Rob. He was just beginning to sense it. Chapter 3. Cracks in the Foundation. By the late 90s, things between Rob and Brenda weren't just strained, they were splintering. And not in that loud, dramatic way that neighbors can see from across the street. No, this was quiet, measured. Like watching a polished piece of wood slowly crack under pressure. You know something's shifting beneath the surface, but you can't quite see it, not yet. Rob had always been a man of consistency, work, family, church. He wasn't perfect, but he was committed to his values, to Brenda, to being a good father. And that consistency made him predictable in the best way. You always knew where he'd be, what he'd say, how he'd show up. But Brenda, she was changing. And not just in how she looked, though. That was the first thing people noticed. She started going out more often, wearing clothes that didn't quite fit the image of a stay-at-home church mom. There were whispers that she hired a nanny not because she was overwhelmed, but because she needed time for herself. And when she left the house, it wasn't in jeans and a sweatshirt. It was sequins, lipstick, hair done, ready for something else, but never the grocery store like she claimed. The babysitter remembered seeing Brenda come downstairs one evening, dressed like she was heading to a nightclub while telling her she was just running to grab some milk. That doesn't sit right. Not for a woman who once built her identity around modesty, tradition, control. So what changed? It wasn't just restlessness. It wasn't just fashion. It was like Brenda had stepped into an entirely new role and was playing it with confidence that Rob, heartbreakingly, couldn't seem to keep up with. That's when James Pavat became more than just a whisper. James wasn't just some guy from church. He was part of their world, another deacon, a trusted figure. He even sold Rob a life insurance policy not just once, but multiple times. They had conversations, laughed together, took a hunting trip. Rob didn't think he needed to worry about James, but he should have. Because while Rob was working late, attending church groups, or making plans for the future, Brenda and James were making other plans, together. They were seen dining out, often with the kids, vacationing, taking photos that looked more like a family album than anything involving a so-called family friend. In some of those pictures, Rob was nowhere to be found. And the thing is, he didn't even know the photos existed. Imagine finding out your wife took your children on a getaway with another man, a man you trusted. At some point, Brenda stopped hiding it. She didn't need to. Their separation was in motion, and Rob, ever hopeful, ever loyal, was trying to ride it out. He believed things could still work. He wasn't letting go, not yet. But what choice did she give him? He'd already sacrificed so much. He moved cities for his job. Brenda followed until she didn't want to anymore. He offered her space, independence. Even when she stayed behind in Texas with the kids for a while, he supported it. He believed in partnership. He wasn't trying to control her. He just wanted his family to stay intact. But Brenda had moved on, emotionally, mentally, and soon legally. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She asked for a divorce. That hit Rob harder than anything else. Not because of pride, not because of money, but because he knew exactly what it meant. His family, the one thing he built his life around, was gone. And still, even through the pain, he tried to protect what was left. That's when he did something subtle but telling. He changed the beneficiary on his life insurance policy. Took Brenda's name off. Put his brother Tom's name instead. So if anything ever happened to him, his kids would be cared for. Not Brenda, not James, just the children. He didn't accuse her. He didn't call the police. He didn't rage. He just acted quietly. But even that last act of quiet self-protection wasn't enough. Because what Rob didn't know was that someone had already tampered with the paperwork, and by the time he'd realize it, it might be too late. Chapter 4. Warnings. He couldn't ignore. There's a moment in every true crime case where the story turns, where everything that once felt like emotional betrayal begins to look like something far more dangerous. For Rob Andrew, that moment came on a day that should have been ordinary. It started with his car. He was backing out of the garage when something felt off. The brakes weren't responding the way they should. Not sluggish, but dead, like pressing on air. He stopped the car, checked again. Still nothing. Most people might have chalked it up to mechanical failure. An old part, maybe. But Rob wasn't that naive. Something about it didn't feel random. So he took the car in to be inspected. And that's when the mechanic told him something no one ever expects to hear. The brake lines had been cut, clean, deliberate, and suddenly it all clicked. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted him dead. Let that sink in. You're going about your life, juggling your job, your kid's a messy separation, and then you find out someone has sabotaged your car in a way that could have killed you instantly. It wasn't just terrifying. It was personal. Rob knew it. He even said it out loud during a call to police. It feels like someone's trying to murder me. But that's the thing about being the nice guy. People don't always take your fears seriously. The call didn't trigger an emergency investigation. No one was arrested. There were no follow-ups, no dramatic forensic sweep of his garage. And maybe part of that was Rob's own doing. Maybe he was still trying to protect Brenda, still clinging to hope that this was just a scare, a misunderstanding, something that could still be salvaged. But it couldn't. Not anymore. Because just a short time after that, Rob received a phone call that would confirm what he already suspected: someone wasn't just trying to scare him. They were trying to finish what they started. The voice on the other end of the line was unfamiliar. The message was urgent. Brenda had been in a terrible car accident. She was in critical condition. The hospital didn't know if she was going to make it. Rob needed to get there immediately. Now here's where I have to pause and say, this could have worked. This call, the panic, the rush, it was designed to get him into that car, speeding down the highway with a broken brake line. It was the perfect trap. Cold, calculated, almost cinematic in its cruelty. But Rob didn't fall for it. He didn't panic. He didn't jump in the car. He didn't race down the road to save a woman who had stopped loving him years ago. Instead, he did something incredibly simple and incredibly smart. He called the hospital. And they told him there was no Brenda Andrew, no car accident, no critical patient, no emergency. Just silence. And that silence said everything. That phone call wasn't meant to inform. It was meant to kill. Rob had dodged death for the second time in as many weeks. So now the question wasn't if someone wanted him dead, it was who. And tragically, the list was short. 2 names, Brenda and James. He couldn't prove it yet. He didn't want to believe it. But the truth was starting to set in. The brake lines, the fake phone call, the odd energy every time he was around them, the look in Brenda's eyes when he asked her to end the affair. Not anger, not guilt, but detachment. She was already gone. And maybe she didn't want to leave him alive. Still, Rob held on. Not to the marriage he knew that was over, but to his role as a father. He wasn't going to abandon his kids. No matter how messy things got with Brenda, he was determined to stay in their lives. And maybe that's what made him dangerous. Because if Rob stayed alive, Brenda couldn't start over clean. If he kept the kids, if he moved on, if he exposed what she'd been doing, then she'd lose control of the narrative. And people like Brenda, they don't like to lose control. So Rob did what he thought was right. He documented everything. He started taking precautions, and quietly he began preparing for the worst. But even the most cautious man can't prepare for betrayal at point-blank range. And Rob didn't know it yet, but the end was coming, faster than he could imagine. Chapter 5. The Setup. By the time November 20th arrived, Rob must have felt like he was walking through life with a storm cloud trailing just a few feet behind him. He didn't say it outright. He wasn't the kind of man to dramatize things. But the signs were there. The quiet journaling, the change to his life insurance, the car sabotage, the fake hospital call. All of it pointed in one direction: someone wanted him gone. And yet, he still showed up. That evening, he drove over to Brenda's house to pick up the kids for Thanksgiving weekend. It was his turn to have them. He was excited, genuinely excited. That part never changed. No matter how tense things got between him and Brenda, Rob loved his children with a kind of purity that never wavered. As he drove, he was on the phone with a friend, talking about the holiday plans. Just small talk, comforting in its normalcy. He even mentioned how happy he was to see the kids. He was probably picturing them waiting by the front door, bags packed ready to go. But when he pulled into the garage, something was off. The door was open. Brenda was standing there. Alone. There were no kids in sight, no bags, no laughter. Just her standing by the family van like she'd been waiting. He told his friend on the phone, "Hey, I'm here. I'll call you back." And then he stepped out of the car. Brenda greeted him with what must have seemed like a simple request. The furnace was out and the house was freezing. Could he take a look at it? Of course he agreed. Of course he followed her toward the furnace even after everything. That was Rob, helpful, willing, still hopeful in his own way. He crouched down in the garage, inspecting the pilot light, completely unaware of what was about to happen. And then, gunfire. Two masked men appeared at the entrance of the garage and opened fire. Rob was shot twice in the chest. He collapsed before he had a chance to react. Brenda was also shot once in the upper arm. Within minutes, Brenda was calling 911. Her voice on the line was frantic. She told the dispatcher they had been attacked in their garage by two masked gunmen, that they came out of nowhere, that they ran off after shooting them. But the details didn't quite fit. When police arrived, they expected to find signs of robbery, forced entry, missing items, some kind of motive beyond the violence. But there was nothing. Rob's wallet was still in his pocket. The family vehicles were untouched. The house hadn't been broken into. Nothing was stolen. No signs of a getaway vehicle. No panic. Just a brutal, precise attack, and then silence. Police tried to question Brenda, but she was in shock. She repeated the same thing two masked men. No idea who they were. No idea why they came. But here's where it started to fall apart. Because if this was a robbery, why would the attackers leave everything behind? If it was random, why did they know exactly where to find Rob crouched down in the garage at just the right moment? And if Brenda was just an innocent victim, why did the forensics suggest otherwise? For starters, investigators found only two bullet casings at the scene, one from a .22 caliber revolver and one from a shotgun. That alone raised questions. Why two different weapons? Why two different types of ammunition? It pointed to something chilling, two shooters with two separate weapons working together. The shotgun had been used to kill Rob. The .22 revolver, the one that wounded Brenda, had left residue on her clothes. And that detail, that's where things got interesting. When forensic experts analyzed her blouse, they didn't just find blood. They found gunpowder residue. Now for those unfamiliar, when you fire a gun, tiny particles of gunpowder spray out alongside the bullet. But they don't travel far, maybe a couple feet at most. Which means if Brenda had really been shot from 15 to 20 feet away like she claimed, her clothing shouldn't have had that level of residue. But it did. A lot of it. The kind of residue you'd expect if someone had fired a weapon at extremely close range, possibly even at themselves. So now police were looking at a scene that didn't make sense. A story that didn't match the evidence. A woman who was injured just enough to seem like a victim, but not enough to be convincing. And underneath it all, a man dead on the garage floor who had seen it coming. Rob had tried to protect himself. He had written things down, changed his policy, warned his friends. But when it came down to it, he still trusted the wrong people. He still walked into that garage. And whatever happened next was no longer a mystery of who. It was a matter of proving it. Chapter 6. Paper Trails and Shattered Truths. After the shooting, the police had a crime scene with no real motive, no signs of theft, and a victim that everyone respected. But underneath the surface, something wasn't right, and investigators knew it. Rob Andrew had been executed. That much was clear. This wasn't random, this wasn't desperate, this was deliberate. And someone wanted it to look messy. Just not too messy. Brenda had her story, two masked men, a random attack, a stroke of horrifying luck. But the evidence wasn't cooperating. The bullet residue on her blouse, the proximity of the gunshot, the inconsistencies in her timeline. None of it added up. And then there was James Pavat, the man who had once prayed beside Rob in church, the man who sold him a life insurance policy, the man who was now inseparable from Brenda. It didn't take long for police to start pulling that thread. First came the neighbors, people from the church, family friends. All of them had something to say, little things at first, whispers that Brenda and James had gotten too close, glances exchanged during Sunday service, side conversations, and then the bigger things, the vacations, the dinners, the fact that Brenda had brought her kids along on trips with James while Rob was still alive. It was strange, inappropriate, but it still wasn't proof. The real turning point came with the insurance policy. Rob had taken out a life insurance policy through James. That alone wasn't unusual. James worked in insurance, and on paper it made sense. But what caught investigators' attention was that just weeks before his death, Rob had changed the beneficiary. He no longer wanted Brenda to receive the money. Instead, he listed his brother Tom as the new recipient. Rob had told people he didn't trust the situation anymore. He didn't want Brenda or anyone connected to her to benefit if something happened to him. It should have been a simple switch. But after Rob's murder, when the insurance company pulled the documents, the money was still set to go to Brenda. How well James Pavat had access. He didn't just sell the policy, he handled the paperwork, and all he needed was a signature. One that looked enough like Rob's to pass. One that wouldn't raise questions. But it did raise questions. Big ones. A handwriting expert was brought in. They compared the signature on the updated insurance form with years' worth of documents signed by Rob. Letters, legal filings, even church records. One thing stood out immediately. Rob had a habit. A personal flourish. Every time he signed something official, he added a small symbol, the ichthys. That little Christian fish symbol, a quiet nod to his faith. On the forged document, no fish, no flourish, just a name, clean, cold, not Rob, and that was enough to send the investigation into overdrive. Now it wasn't just suspicion, now it was forgery, now it was motive. If Brenda and James could stage a robbery, fake a wound, and walk away with $800,000 in life insurance, then maybe, just maybe, they didn't need to be caught in the act. Because the trail they left behind, it was louder than any confession. Then came another twist, one that no one saw coming. A neighbor, Judy, had just returned from vacation. She lived next door to Brenda, and as she unpacked, she noticed something strange. Her shoe rack was missing. Later, she found it shoved under her bed, broken. That alone might have been written off as odd. But when she went to the attic to double-check for damage, she found something else. Bullets. Loose, unfamiliar bullets rolling around in the insulation. They were .22 caliber, the exact same type of ammunition used to shoot Brenda and Judy. She had given Brenda a spare key for emergencies. Let that settle for a second. Brenda had access. James had a new weapon. The bullets matched. And now a second home had entered the picture, a hiding place, a staging area, maybe even a fallback plan. It was no longer just a theory. Everything pointed to a cold, calculated plan, one that didn't go quite as smoothly as they hoped. And when police started cross-referencing timelines, gun purchases, and interviews, it became clear this was never meant to look random. It was meant to look like survival, like Brenda barely escaped with her life. But what they found instead was a woman who had spent months laying a foundation, changing her image, building an alibi, and planting just enough chaos to blur the line between victim and mastermind. James wasn't far behind. Investigators learned he had purchased a .22 caliber revolver just days before the murder. And the closer police looked, the more it all started to align: the fake hospital call, the sabotage to Rob's car, the insurance forgery, the bullets in the neighbor's attic. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a blueprint. And Brenda, she had followed it almost perfectly. Almost. Chapter 7, Gone Without a Goodbye. In the days following Rob Andrews' murder, Oklahoma City was buzzing with speculation. People were heartbroken, yes, but also confused. The story just didn't make sense. The attack didn't feel random. The evidence pointed in one direction, and slowly, almost painfully, that direction was Brenda. But just as the investigation was gaining traction, Brenda did something no one saw coming. She vanished. No warning, no press statement, no formal interview with police. Just gone. At first, people assumed she was grieving in private, that maybe the shock of the attack had pushed her into hiding, that maybe she was protecting her kids from the public eye, because surely, she wouldn't run. But then came Rob's funeral. It was held 6 days after the shooting. Friends, co-workers, church members, they all gathered to say goodbye to a man who by every account had lived his life with integrity, faith, and love. Everyone was there, except Brenda, and the children. They were nowhere to be found. The woman who had just survived an alleged attack, the wife of the man who had been murdered, the mother of his children. She didn't show up, not even for the burial. People waited, in the chapel, at the graveside, in silence. And when it became clear she wasn't coming, that this wasn't just a late arrival, that silence turned to something heavier, suspicion. Even Brenda's own family began to worry. Her parents reached out to the police. They believed, or at least desperately hoped, that Brenda hadn't disappeared by choice. They thought maybe James had taken her, that she and the children were being held against their will, that she was in danger. They pleaded with the public. If you're out there, Brenda, please just let us know you're okay. But deep down, I think they knew, because what mother misses her husband's funeral, her children's father, and leaves no trace behind? The truth was Brenda wasn't being held hostage. She was running. She and James had loaded up a car, packed the kids, and driven straight toward the Mexican border. While mourners gathered around Rob's casket, she was crossing state lines, slipping away from the life she once called home. It was deliberate, and in many ways it was a final insult, a quiet confirmation that everything Rob had feared was true. It wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was evasion, flight, guilt. The police, now certain they had their suspects, issued warrants for both Brenda and James' first-degree murder and conspiracy. But they had no idea where they'd gone. For all they knew, the two of them could have vanished into another country, started over, disappeared into some quiet village where no one knew their names. Weeks passed, then months. Billboards went up, news reports aired. The FBI offered a $15,000 reward for information, but there was nothing. Just two faces on wanted posters and the echo of a community asking, "How could this happen here?" Rob's friends were devastated. His brother Tom, the one who Rob had trusted with his children's future, was left to pick up the pieces. The church community that had once seen Brenda and James as upstanding leaders was now reckoning with the fact that two of their own had weaponized that trust. It felt like betrayal on every level, but justice, as slow and heavy as it sometimes moves, was still coming. Because on February 29th, leap day of all days, a border checkpoint near Hidalgo, Texas, flagged a license plate. Brenda Andrew and James Pavat had been found, trying to cross back into the United States. The timing was bizarre. No one knows exactly why they returned. Maybe they were out of money. Maybe they thought the heat had cooled down. Or maybe, like so many others before them, they underestimated just how closely the law was watching. Either way, they were taken into custody without incident. No more running, no more stories, no more pretending. They were finally going to face what they'd done. Chapter 8, The Trial and the Truth. When Brenda and James were brought back to Oklahoma, the silence finally started to break. The community had been waiting not just for justice, but for answers, for someone to stand in that courtroom and explain how a seemingly loving wife and devoted church leader could end up at the center of such a cold, calculated murder. What unfolded during the trial wasn't just damning. It was devastating. James Pavat was the first to go on trial in 2003. He kept quiet throughout most of it, no grand declarations, no emotional breakdowns, just silence. Maybe he thought the evidence wouldn't be enough. Maybe he still believed somehow that the jury would see him as a loyal friend who got caught in the wrong situation. But the jury didn't see it that way. They saw the forged insurance paperwork, his name on it. They saw the record of him purchasing the .22 caliber revolver just days before the murder. They saw his relationship with Brenda, his involvement in every stage of the plan. And they saw Rob, a good man, ambushed in his garage because James helped make it happen. The verdict was unanimous, guilty of first-degree murder. And then came the sentence, death. It was shocking, even for Oklahoma, a state known for its tough sentencing. But the message was clear: this wasn't just a crime of passion. It was betrayal, premeditated and precise. And it cost a man his life. Brenda's trial followed soon after, and if James's courtroom felt cold and procedural, Brenda's trial felt personal. She walked into that courtroom no longer as a grieving widow or a mother of two. She walked in as an accused conspirator, as a woman who had allegedly pulled the trigger herself. The prosecution painted her as manipulative, calculating, and deeply self-interested. They didn't hold back. They brought in church members who spoke about her behavior before the murder, the flirtations, the shifting personality, the the distance she created between herself and Rob. But more than that, they had science. They showed the gunshot residue on her clothes, the blood spatter analysis that suggested she had been standing far closer to Rob than she admitted, maybe even holding the gun that delivered the final fatal shot. The wound on her arm carefully placed, non-lethal, the kind of injury someone might inflict if they needed to look like a victim. They showed the altered life insurance policy, the handwriting analysis, the Christian fish symbol, the one Rob always included when he signed anything official absent on the document that gave Brenda the payout. They showed the bullets found in her neighbor's attic, a neighbor she had a key to, a place James could have hidden while police swarmed the scene. Piece by piece, the image of Brenda as a victim fell apart, and perhaps the most damning moment of all, when the court learned that after Brenda called 911, after she told police she and Rob had just been attacked, she handed James the neighbor's house key. He was hiding in the attic the entire time, waiting. That wasn't fear. That wasn't survival. That was strategy. The jury saw it for what it was: guilty. First-degree murder. Conspiracy to commit murder. And, like James, Brenda was sentenced to death. She became the only woman on Oklahoma's death row, a title she still holds. I think what hit me the hardest wasn't just the coldness of the crime. It was the sheer disregard for the children. The two lives that Brenda and Rob brought into the world, two kids who lost both of their parents in one single horrifying act. Their father was taken from them. Their mother gave herself away. And in the middle of it all, no one seemed to be thinking about them. The trials ended. The courtroom cleared. The headlines faded. But those kids. They had to grow up in the shadow of this story, and that's something no jury verdict can ever undo. Chapter 9. Echoes that never fade. Some stories end with a conviction, a verdict, a sentence, but this one, it lingers. Even after the jury spoke, even after the headlines moved on, there's a heaviness to this case that doesn't go away, because the real tragedy wasn't just in what Brenda and James did, it was in who got left behind to live with it. Rob Andrews' children lost their father in the most brutal, senseless way. He was taken from them not by illness or accident, but by a plan, a deliberate, carefully constructed plan that involved their own mother. That's something no child should have to grow up understanding. And Brenda, she didn't just lose her freedom. She gave up something far more permanent, her role as a mother, as a protector, as the person those kids should have been able to trust more than anyone. I keep coming back to that moment. The one where Rob changed his insurance policy. Quietly. Without anger, without revenge, just protection. All he wanted was for his kids to be okay no matter what happened to him. And that says everything about who he was. He knew something wasn't right. He knew he was in danger, and yet he still showed up. For his kids, for Thanksgiving, for a weekend that should have been about family and healing. Instead, it ended in gunfire. When people talk about this case, and they still do it, often becomes about the betrayal, the affair, the manipulation. But for me, it's always been about the children. The ones who had no choice, the ones who were dragged into an adult world of secrets and violence and lies. They were used as props, as leverage, as symbols of a picture-perfect family that didn't really exist anymore. And yet, through all of that, they're the ones who suffered the most. Brenda and James are still on death row. And whether you believe in the death penalty or not, their fate feels in some strange way secondary to the real damage they caused. The ripple effect. The grandparents who lost a son and watched a daughter spiral into darkness. The church community that had to reckon with how far deception can hide behind a smile. The friends who watched a good man die because he chose compassion over confrontation. And the children, now grown, left to figure out how to live with a past that none of us can ever fully understand. It's easy to look at a case like this and boil it down to one sentence: she killed him for the insurance money. But it's never just that. It's pride, power, control. It's what happens when someone becomes convinced that their needs matter more than anyone else's life, that their happiness is worth destroying someone else's future. Rob Andrew deserved better. His kids deserved better. And all of us, if we're really honest, need to sit with the discomfort of that. Because stories like this don't just happen in some faraway place. They happen in neighborhoods like yours and mine, behind garage doors and dinner tables and church pews, in homes that look peaceful from the outside. They happen when someone decides that love, loyalty, and life itself are disposable. I don't know where Rob's kids are today, and I wouldn't try to find out. That part of the story doesn't belong to us, but I hope they're okay. I hope they found peace. And I hope in some quiet way they still know how much their father loved them. Even at the end. Especially at the end. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If you made it this far, you know this case isn't just about what happened in a garage in Oklahoma. It's about what happens when we ignore the warning signs, when love turns into power, when people stop seeing each other as human and start seeing them as obstacles. These stories hurt, and they should, because they remind us that tragedy doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it comes quietly wrapped in routine behind the people we trust the most. If this story resonated with you, I hope you'll take a moment to reflect not just on the crime, but on the people affected, especially the ones who never got to speak for themselves. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, the ones that linger, the ones that leave questions, don't forget to subscribe. This is True Crime Echoes, where we don't just tell stories, we sit with them. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other.